El próximo conferencista va a ser Andreas Mehl. Andreas Mehl trabaja en Bayer desde 1995 y desde el año 2001 está responsable de estudios de monitoreo de sensibilidad y de manejo de resistencia a fungicidas en un programa de Research Disease Control en la sede de la División de Ciencia de Cultivo en Mannheim, Alemania. Andreas está también muy involucrado en el FRAC, especialmente en el Banana Working Group. Estábamos esta semana reunidos para estos asuntos aquí en la ciudad de Miami. Y entonces Andreas nos va a hablar de, su presentación va a ser sobre Isotianil, una nueva herramienta para el control de enfermedades en el cultivo de banano. Andrea, this is yours.
Many thanks and good morning, everybody. Many thanks, Luc, for the kind introduction. Also, many thanks for the organizers. It's a pleasure for me here to give you a short presentation, introduction on Isotianil, a new tool for the control of diseases in bananas, and a product which has been developed by Bayer during the last decade. For us, it's very important to tell you that it is really a new active ingredient, and it is not a fungicide. It's a plant defense inducer. Plant defense inducer are finally nothing new. You may know some of them already being in the market, but this is a new generation with a different concept behind, and I would like to explain it a little bit more in detail. Finally, Isotianil, being a plant defense inducer, is switching on the plant's natural defense mechanism, and therefore it's of course seen to be applied in a preventive situation. It is a member of a new unique class of these kind of chemistries. It's a FRAC code P03. And as Luc just mentioned, we had at the beginning of this week our FRAC working group meeting, and Isotianil has been newly introduced into the FRAC code list. Okay, this is a brief agenda. What about this natural plant defense system, and how really does Isotianil work? We see it as a revolution in Sigatoka control, something completely new. And as you may have heard from the keynote talk this morning, it's becoming more and more difficult from the regulatory perspective to have tools in hands to control black Sigatoka. I also would like to briefly touch you with some information on the results of Isotianil. And finally, also quite new and very interesting findings we received a few weeks ago, because it's not only a compound for Sigatoka control, although this is of course the most important aspect of this compound. So let's have a brief look on these immune systems. Finally, there are 3 different levels, and I do not want to go into detail. Yesterday there was also a nice talk on all the biochemical backgrounds on systemic acquired resistance and plant defense induction. However, we focus finally on these 3 kind of resistance types. You have the basic resistance, the hypersensitive response, and in the case of Isotianil, on the so-called systemic acquired resistance. What is behind? Okay, basic resistance, this is nothing special. This is finally a fact if a plant has a thicker cell wall or thicker waxy layer. This is, let's say, the natural way to defend. Hypersensitive responses, okay, then you need an attack of a pathogen, and then the cells around are realizing, okay, something is happening, and then it's finally leading to killing or destruction of the cells around the area where the pathogen is infecting. Systemic acquired resistance now finally is of course also in reaction in response to a local pathogen attack. But in this case, a signal is produced and in a biological, quite complicated process. This message is transferred to all other parts of the plant and is then, let's say, automatically preparing a readiness to persist for a faster reaction if a pathogen really will attack. This is a schematic picture of this systemic acquired resistance. We have different systems. Here in this case, salicylic acid is the messenger. And you need here a local plant attack. Oh, sorry. And if this plant is, let's say, confronted with a pathogen, it produces this cascade. In the case of Isotianil now, there is one big difference. You don't need here a pathogen attack, and it's just, let's say, preparing the systemic acquired resistance by itself. Interestingly, Isotianil is not the active principle, it's a precursor. It's formulated in a way that it is sitting on the waxy layer of the leaves. It produces a kind of reservoir, and it's therefore very rainfast. This is one very important advantage of Isotianil. Then, over the period of time, over days and weeks, and even up to more than 30 days, the so-called isotianilic acid is released out of this reservoir. So isotianil is transferred to isotianilic acid, and this is finally the active concept. Isotianilic acid is then mimicking the normal salicylic acid and starts this biochemical signaling cascade. So finally, like the natural salicylic acid, this isotianilic acid is the cause of this defense mechanism. I mentioned at the beginning that isotianil is not a fungicide, and this is really important for us to highlight this. This is a small and simple test where we compared certain multisites and other products here, copper, ethane, and anthracol, and even with a comparably low concentration in this test system of around 10 ppm, or EC50 values of around 0.1 up to 0.2 ppm, you have a significant impact of the spore germination. In the case of isotianil, if you would do a spore germination test, you would see nothing. So this is really important to know. On the other hand, it's important for growers, if you regard this regulatory situation in Europe, everybody wants to have less fungicides, and that's why we are so keen to say that it is not a fungicide. But how does it then control the pathogen? And this is, let's say, the concept of this plant defense induction, because it reduces over the period of time the entire inoculum which is able to penetrate the leaf. How is this working? Okay, as mentioned here, this is the isotianil itself. Some pictures here with some research institutes where we can see here that isotianil is sitting on the surface. It produces then the isotianilic acid, and this is then transferred in a better way to the leaf. This is now a training effect, and this is an interesting point. The more you apply isotianil, the more the plant is strengthened, and the more it is prepared to a plant attack, pathogen attack, which means after one application, you may not realize anything. After two applications, maybe also not. After the third, at least we assume. And the more you apply, the better the plant is protected. You know that we are all having discussions since more than 2 years about COVID-19 and the vaccination. This is finally a similar concept. If you have one big shot of a vaccine, you may have hurt in your arm or wherever the needle is in. If you do a vaccination early January and then mid of January and then end of January and beginning of February, so with 4 needles, this is also not good for the body. Therefore, of course, we have also an interval between the vaccinations of several weeks or even months, and the same concept is true for isotianil and the banana plant. We recommend a minimum spray interval of 4 weeks, but to use this deposit effect in the best way, we assume that 6 weeks is the best interval between 2 different sprays. In the FRAC working group on Monday, we recommended the 4 weeks interval as the absolute minimum, but as mentioned, 6 weeks is the best, and we prefer even 1 application per quarter, dependent, of course, on the environment conditions and the country. These are now some pictures how it works. We do not want to bother you with details on trial results. It has been developed over a period of 10 years. You can believe us that there is activity. This is simply here a picture where you see isotianil together with oil. Here in this test system, 2 liters. But I also want to highlight that the advantage of isotianil is in practice you only need 4 liters, 1 gallon. That's all and not more. And I think this is very also quite comfortable. If you magnify it a little bit more, you see here in this trial, after several applications of isotianil, the difference to untreated. I think this is a very nice message, and of course we are happy to see what will go on in the practice if customers are trying to use isotianil and to see about the efficacy. A very nice aspect is, and I mentioned also some side effects, which I would regard as very important and nice side effects. Together with the university in Wageningen, we already started 6 years ago some greenhouse and lab trials with Cavendish. You see here some pictures of infected, untreated plants, infected ones, a commercial fungicide, and isotianil, and here you see the cuttings here of the stems. Finally, after isotianil application, here you see a much cleaner part of the plant compared to commercial fungicides and unaffected ones, which means not only Sigatoka is controlled, which is of course the main focus of the product, but it prevents also to other diseases. Why not? It's a general mechanism, the systemic acquired resistance, and therefore we already observed at this time, okay, there seems to be also something behind in regard to Fusarium, which means the systemic signaling effect is also going down up to the stem. These are some pictures here of untreated and isotianil treated. Of course, it's hard to see on a picture. You have to see this impact on your own in the field. Here the inhibition of the disease progression here stops, and the photo finally shows that the outer pseudostem here initially being affected dried off after the application. You may not see this as a convincing picture. Therefore, I'm happy to share you now some more results, which we received only 2-3 weeks ago from a cooperation partner together with SIAD and the Alliance Biodiversity. We worked with a professor in Asia, Professor Sishun Singh, and he provided us with these results just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'm really happy to share these latest findings with all of you. This is a, let's say, semi in vivo plant pot test, so it's not in the greenhouse, so it's a quite open field area, but potted banana plants. And 62 days after the inoculation here, you see here in the untreated control, of course, nothing, so it's without inoculation. But here he inoculated with Fusarium oxysporum tropical race 4, and you see clearly here disease in these main parts of the plant. After isotianil application, 60 days after the same inoculation, you see more or less nothing. A little bit is coming up. It's clear it's not a curative product. Of course, it's not a golden bullet which is able to control everything. If the disease is once in, you have also not a chance with the vaccination, but it's really preventing or suppressing the disease if you apply this isotianil over a long period of time. You need to be patient, of course. No, it's not a tool you apply it once and then everything is working. 3-4 applications, the more the better, according to this training effect. Now, we asked also the professor to do some cuttings here, typical microscopic pictures. The hyphae are stained in green. This is a longitudinal section. This is a transverse cutting here of the stem. And you see everywhere where you have this green color, these are the hyphae of tropical race 4. These are pictures of the root. So in the root, it's not working. But, and this is very, very surprising for us, but also very good to know, it works on the corm. So in the basic of the plant, you have here finally no hyphae visible anymore here. Nothing is green. These are the same cuttings, more or less the same sections, with the knife, but you see here definitely no hyphae. As mentioned, these are very nice studies. The studies are also ongoing. What we are now planning together, cooperation here with biodiversity and this professor, is also to quantify in a molecular way the amount of the DNA of Fusarium in the plant. This also takes some time. This needs to be figured out in a detailed way to have some more facts, some more statistics. But I'm pretty sure that these pictures are already quite nice to demonstrate that the plant defense inducer can work, is working, and we are convinced that it is not only a Sigatoka product, but also helps to prevent the upcome of Fusarium. This is on top, let's say it like this. How do we recommend it? Yeah, we even recommend it in the wet season. Luc mentioned that we discuss in the FRAC working group often the sensitivity of all these different active ingredients, azoles, amines, anilinopyrimidines. And I remember that we often have a sentence, please use it in a drier situation or in very soft conditions in order not to put a too high selection pressure on the compound. This is, at least in my career at Bayer, the first time that I go in front of an audience and tell people, hey, please use it, please, under the severe conditions, please use it in the wet period, because then it's working best. You can also mix it with a multisite, whatever, and it's even working a little bit better. And this is very fortunate from our point of view. As mentioned, we recommend an interval of 4 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks are preferred. Mixing is okay. It is used towards all these kind of Sigatoka diseases, and it should be only used on baked fruits, because then you have no residues. Interesting maybe for the producers, all of you here, it leaves really no measurable residues, and the MRL for the US is already granted, and I think this is also quite good. Coming back to the keynote talk and the regulatory situation, particularly in Europe, this is a very good advantage. And you may also be aware that also the future of multisites is for sure becoming more and more difficult. We have to look for new solutions, for new ideas, and this is from our point of view another concept which helps to overall control the diseases. As mentioned, it is very important to highlight that there is no direct fronticellular activity, but by strengthening the plant, the amount of incoming spores which are able to penetrate the plant is reduced. And by reducing the inoculum in the plant, you also reduce the selection pressure on the other systemic fungicides. And this is a concept of a different way of resistance management, and why I'm also here so keen to work with this compound. Finally, a summary. We see Isotianil as a breakthrough in banana disease control. It's a plant defense inducer according to the FRAC code P03. It's now listed also in the banana guidelines. It's a new mode of action for Sigatoka control and Fusarium suppression. Has no direct fungicidal effect, okay, but also no phytotoxicity. We see no negative yield effect, of course, after multiple years of testing. This is for sure very important. And it is flexible, and this is also good news. It works even better under wet conditions, as mentioned. The effect is more stronger visible if you see, need to see here really the impact. And by itself, there is no need for resistance management. Natural defense mechanisms, plant defense induction. I'm not aware of any paper in the world which is describing that a plant defense inducer became resistant. Otherwise, the entire system would collapse, and this is mostly not the case. But it's a tool for resistance management of all the other products requiring this kind of modifiers. 6 weeks interval I mentioned, no residues, global trade enabled, see high efficacy, and also more green leaves, which is of course also a very important aspect for yield and transport of bananas. And with this, I would like to stop and thank you for your kind attention. Many thanks.
Muchas gracias, Andreas, para mostrarnos que la industria química está enfocada en nuevos productos y más amigables. Vamos a una sola y muy rápida pregunta al señor Andreas. I have just one for you, Andreas. Do you believe that the product will be probably registered for organic production, or is it totally impossible?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Most likely it will not, because it's an artificial produced chemical compound. So it's not produced out of a natural source, which is partly also the case when you remember the strawberries. They are finally also based on a natural product, but then are modified. So I think this is most probably unlikely, but let's see what the entire regulation process will bring. At least I think it's a very good news that it is not a real fungicide in the context of toxicology, no residues, and this is at least advantage, so it's a little bit in between, I would say.
Thank you, Andreas.